So you never know what's going to happen in the world of professional wrestling, and I feel like the last couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of whatever, they were filled with rumor and innuendo, and you never knew what was going to happen. But guess what? We've got one of the biggest events I've ever seen as far as live TV events, and it's because of this guy, Bryan Danielson, who made his debut at AEW on September 5th at Chicago at All Out. It was fantastic. And now he's here a day before they blow the roof off New York City. AEW Dynamite Grandslam tomorrow night on TNT. Bryan Danielson, thank you for joining wrestling.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was quite an introduction. That was
what an introduction.
Wasn't that wordy?
Yeah.
It was a little much.
Yeah, wordy and purdy.
Wasn't it wonderful? Man, listen, you've been around the wrestling business for a very long time. You're one of the best wrestlers in the world. You ever felt the energy you feel right now as far as just this pulsating through the wrestling business?
You know, I think this is the coolest time ever in wrestling since I've been a part of it.
Yeah.
Because so when I started, my first match was October 4th, 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And so WCW was still around against WWF, but WCW was really starting to fall off.
Right.
And then within 2 years, they were sold to WWF, and the ECW fell apart and disintegrated and that sort of thing. So this is the first time in almost 20 years that there's been a true alternative, and that there's been two big companies in the United States, and that's great for fans, that's great for wrestlers. I think that's great for everybody. I mean, it's exciting, and and what's really exciting is to be like the momentum for AEW feels so strong right now, and it feels like the whole landscape is changing.
I mean, you guys are coming into the best wrestling city in the world, and you're doing a building that's never been done before, and the buzz is palpable. And I want to talk about all that. We're going to lay all that out. But I got to first ask you, tomorrow night you're going to be wrestling against Kenny Omega. How long have you been thinking about a match with Kenny Omega?
A long time. And so I had actually wrestled Kenny Omega in 2009. Right. And it was like he hadn't made that much of a name for himself yet. But throughout my time in WWE, I constantly watch what's going on in other places.
Right.
I want to see how wrestling's evolving. I want to see what other people are doing, that sort of thing. And then when Kenny Omega really started busting through in New Japan, first in the juniors division and then in the heavyweight division, my mind started going like, oh man, this would be awesome. And that's actually the seed for the thought when I realized last week, this is the biggest match of my career.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't, like, I've main evented WrestleManias and all that kind of stuff, but this moment feels like the biggest match of my career. Not just, it's the moment itself, as far as this is my first match in AEW, my first match outside of WWE in over 10 years. It's the idea of it being in Arthur Ashe Stadium, the first AEW show in New York City, and it's against somebody who's, you could argue, is, if not the best, one of the best.
Legitimately has a claim to being the best in the world.
Yes.
And that's actually a question I was going to ask later in the show, but I'll move it up now. Kenny Omega is arguably, he is at least in the small conversation of the best wrestler in the world at the moment. That's a conversation that you've been in before, that you've earned in your career, best wrestler in the world. How much pressure does that come with it?
So it's interesting. I think it's all in the individual performer. Some people handle it with ease.
Right.
Some people put a lot of pressure on themselves to do that. And I think it all depends. So, for example, for me, it was never about pleasing other people.
Right.
It was about being the best version of myself.
Okay.
Like, I have a high standard for myself, and the pressure that I feel is not like, oh, I have to please the fans or I have to do this or whatever. It is, I want to perform in this way, and if I don't, like, I'm disappointed. For example, in WWE, there's the gorilla position right before you go out, and there's been times where I've come to the back and gotten a standing ovation, and you have to pretend to be happy, but in my head, I was disappointed with what I did.
You weren't pleased with what happened behind you, but in front of you, there's people applauding you.
Yeah. And likewise, there have been times where I've gone out, done a match, and when I come to the back, nobody's even paying attention to me. Like, they could care less about what just happened. But I was so happy and thrilled with the performance.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to be so successful in WWE, is because I'm not using other people's metric to define success.
So you had a long, successful career outside of WWE before you got there. Then you had a long, very successful career in WWE. For people that will watch tomorrow night, that weren't familiar with Bryan Danielson's matches and are familiar with Daniel Bryan's matches. Will your style be any different from what we're used to?
It'll be interesting to see because I essentially adapted. I had to adapt to the WWE style. Right. Like I created something that I did not do before, and then made it into the character of Daniel Bryan, who was essentially an underdog character.
Right.
I don't know. People may be a little bit surprised by the violence.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
because I think that's one of the things that's differentiating between, say, Bryan Danielson and how I was before and Daniel Bryan. But I think that's one of the things that actually really helped me in WWE is being a small person.
Always kind of fighting from underneath, huh?
Fighting from underneath. But when I get on top of even somebody like a Big Show or a Mark Henry or somebody like that, I could really lay it into them believably.
You could access the violence that you needed.
And that sort of thing. And that's one of the things Big Show and Mark Henry, and we were, all three of us were talking about it just last week about like, they were joking with the younger guys on the AEW roster, like, you guys don't want to be kicked by Daniel Bryan. It's like, so
you've kind of mentioned it earlier, but you have main evented the biggest wrestling show in the world multiple times, and you've been in the biggest stadiums. But now, how does this stack up? Because this is not just a show tomorrow night. It's a moment in the landscape of wrestling. It's a moment. Like, we've been building this all year. First CM Punk debuts, then Bryan Danielson debuts, Adam Cole debuts, and everything is going the right way. And it all built up to this huge show in New York City at a stadium that is going to look incredible. How does this stack up for you, man?
Yeah, to me, this is the biggest match in my career. And the reason why, so for example, I think a lot of people would consider WrestleMania 30 my biggest moment where I main evented WrestleMania. But the reality is, if I went out there and I did not perform very well in that day, maybe the moment wouldn't be remembered. But the ratings weren't going to change the next day. Yeah. It wasn't going to change WWE's business, anything like that. This feels like if Kenny Omega and I go out there and we put on a match that people are raving about, then, and not only just us, but everybody on that show.
Right.
Like, it's the responsibility of every single person on that show because that show is stacked. But it's, if people watch that show, because there are going to be a lot of people tuning in for the first time because it feels so big. So there's this responsibility to really go out there and deliver and show people like, hey, you guys should be watching this on a weekly basis. That makes it feel bigger. The implications of doing well versus doing poorly are much greater.
He's talking about, of course, Dynamite tomorrow night, Dynamite Grand Slam. And the card, as it stands right now, is, of course, headlined by Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champ, against Bryan Danielson. You got Women's Champ Britt Baker against Ruby Soho, who just debuted the same night you debuted, actually.
Yeah.
And I won't talk about that debut in a second because it caught me off guard. Cody Rhodes against Malachi Black. You got FTR against Sting and Darby Allin. And you have MJF against Brian Pillman Jr. And CM Punk will have an interview. And then, of course, we'll have Rampage Friday night, which will be a 2-hour special, which will be also emanating from Arthur Ashe Stadium. So my question is, you debuted September 5th at All Out. And listen, wrestling fans know where to get information. Wrestling fans, they knew you were coming, right? They felt like you were coming.
They knew without knowing. So,
correct. They felt like you were coming. They didn't know. Maybe they, in their mind, they said it'll happen here, it'll happen there. I want it to happen here. I think a lot of people thought you were probably going to debut tomorrow night. A lot of people thought that. But you and Adam Cole debut within 2 minutes of each other. Do you like that y'all did the rapid-fire debuts like that?
So I think it was pretty cool. Tony Khan mentioned it to me.
Right.
And I thought, like, okay, well, are you sure you don't want to space it out? And then he kind of explained his reasons for doing it.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? I've never seen anything done like that before.
You know why I loved it? Because I've never seen anything done like that before. We've been conditioned to know what wrestling debuts look like, wrestling surprises look like. And when it's the end of a pay-per-view and it doesn't go off immediately, okay, something's about to happen. They left a little time here, and then Adam Cole shows up. Okay, there's our debut for the night. That's good. We're done. And here you come. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't expect that.
Yeah, it's almost like brain overload.
Yeah, it was crazy because wrestling, and this is not a shot at any company in the world, wrestling just doesn't have any pure surprise moments as much anymore. Yeah. And it used to be full of them. And that pure surprise moment, like, When Adam Cole came out, first of all, huge Adam Cole fan, huge Bryan Danielson. When he came out, I'm like, wow, what a show. This is awesome. And next time when Bryan Danielson debuts, it's going to be incredible. And then here you come 2 minutes later, and it was one of the best pay-per-views I've ever seen.
Yeah. So one of the things because I wasn't able to watch all of it that night because we were actually I was hidden in a trailer. Yeah. I was hidden in a trailer, and I was just like, and the feed wasn't very good, and then people were coming in and saying hi or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And then anyways, so I watched it back it was either the Monday or the Tuesday or whatever, but before I went to Dynamite, and I texted Tony and I said, that is the most incredible pay-per-view I've ever seen, and I've been watching wrestling from a long time. And the reason why is it's because it was an incredible event in itself. If you just saw it as it was, like, whoa, what an incredible event.
Right.
But it also made you look forward to the future so much. And not just for me or Adam Cole in the main event male scene. Right. All of a sudden you've got Ruby Soho, and now you're excited about the women's division and like
the tag team division too.
The tag team division, and then Minoru Suzuki. So you're even excited about Dynamite that week. Right. You know, you're excited to see Minoru Suzuki and Jon Moxley. And so I texted him. I said that was just such a well put together pay-per-view. I've never seen anything like it.
I had a theory that I espoused on the last wrestling. I want to throw it to you. The intrigue about AEW right now is not in the answers. It's in the questions. And here's what I mean. The answers are Bryan Danielson.
It's okay.
Bryan Danielson debuted All Out September 5th. CM Punk debuted in Chicago. We now have answered those questions. But the questions that remain, okay, what happens next? You have Adam Cole in the company. You have CM Punk in the company. You have Bryan Danielson in the company. You have Kenny Omega in the company. You have Hangman Page in the company. You've got 10, 12, 15 bona fide electric main eventers. You have a tag team division that just put on one of the greatest tag team matches I've ever seen. Where do they go from here? Britt Baker is reaching a level that is rare to see any wrestler reach, and now you got Ruby Soho on top of that, and you've got Thunder Rosa right behind. There are so many unanswered questions. How many permutations of matches you can have, how many storylines you can have, which character goes here, who rises to the top. The questions here are incredible.
The questions are incredible, and I think one of the things that AEW's done a great job of is that they lead you to believe that all those questions will be answered in a way that satisfies you, right? So in a way that like, okay, I was looking forward to this, or I was looking forward to see where this goes,
right?
And then when it happens, you're satisfied.
Yeah.
And then left wanting more questions, right? Like, so the Young Bucks hadn't lost a tag team match in I don't know how long, and you didn't know who's going to beat them, who's like on which night or whatever it is. That night in Chicago felt so satisfying when the Lucha Bros beat them. Like their entrance, everything about that felt epic and felt monumental.
I mean,
then
Penta at the end calling his kids down.
Oh my God, unbelievable!
It was just, I mean, it was 45 minutes of beautiful not professional, right? Just beautiful product, whatever you want to call it.
Whatever you want to
call it. It was just, the wrestling was elite, and then like you said, the entrance was fantastic. And that's what I noticed the night CM Punk debuted. The night CM Punk debuted, like, AEW has been a company for 2 years, and they've had incredible wrestling matches, and they've had everything. But I thought the production value that night when Punk debuted in Chicago, and you had that wide shot of the whole thing and the screens behind him, and you see the whole crowd, I thought, wow, this looks incredible. Yeah. This isn't just a groundswell of great wrestling anymore. This is a well-rounded product that looks elite.
Yeah. So one of the
send the check to Tony. Thanks.
One of the things that I think has really helped AEW, because you have to understand, like, okay, so me and Punk coming is a product of them already being great. If it was something that was Bush League, or if it was Punk wouldn't have gone. Right. I wouldn't have left WWE. Like, they already had momentum that made both of us, made Punk, who was done with wrestling, mentally done with wrestling.
7 years.
Yeah, he was done with it.
And I assume you had a pretty damn good life.
Yeah, and I was very happy where I was, right? But they created a product that was enticing enough to get him to come back to wrestling. They created a product that was enticing enough for me to decide, and I loved WWE. I loved working there. That made me decide to go. They've also created a product that's getting old wrestling fans who've stopped watching back to watching wrestling, and they've also created a product where people who have never seen wrestling, younger people,
Right.
are now watching wrestling and being like, whoa, this is cool. The first time I saw Darby Allin hop off his skateboard,
Right.
and it was like an RKO to Jericho or something, and I was with WWE at the time. I thought, that's the coolest kid I've ever seen. Like,
I had a very similar reaction because the first Dynamite was October 2019, and I am a wrestling fan, a professional wrestling fan, but I'm a huge WWE fan, and I decided to give the other company a chance. I watched the first Dynamite, and the very first match, Sammy Guevara is out there. I don't know who Sammy Guevara is. I really don't at the time, and he does some things. I'm like, wait a minute. Pretty good. At the end, they did this big angle where Sammy joins up with the Inner Circle and joins up with Jericho, and I'm a huge Jericho guy anyway. So I was just like, all right, well, they got me. I'll tune in next week. And by the end of that month, I'm just like, I got AEW shirts on. It's just they really built and built and built. And now, you know what's fascinating to me? You're in the company. You're a big star in the wrestling business. CM Punk, big star in the wrestling business. His return, huge deal. I'm very anxious to see who pops next. Like, who's the next Bryan Danielson? Who's the next CM Punk from this crop of AEW stars, like a Sammy Guevara, like a Jungle Boy Jack Perry, like a MJF?
Yeah.
You know, I'm excited to see how the presence of you guys is the soil that grows the next gigantic redwood in the wrestling business.
Yeah. And
I should write. Can we make a T-shirt of that?
You know, and it's interesting because one of the things that's been very difficult in WWE the last several years is creating new stars.
Mm-hmm.
And AEW came in with a handful of stars that had been known on a nationwide thing. I'm talking like the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega weren't really known nationwide.
Right.
You know, they had a lot of fans.
Yeah.
But they hadn't been on national TV.
It's kind of inside baseball a little bit, right?
Yeah. But you had Jericho, you had Moxley, you had a handful of guys that maybe people knew. But it's the ability to go out there and create these new stars and create people that they're excited about. And so I have no doubts about AEW's future as far as that's concerned, because you can even just see, like, you didn't even name off all of them, right?
No,
like,
not even close to all of them. I didn't name Pillman Jr. I didn't name either of the Lucha Brothers.
Dante Martin. You didn't name Daniel Garcia. You didn't, like, there's all these guys who are young and have so much talent, and they're just going to thrive. And one of the things that I just really excites me, and I think you can probably tell my passion for wrestling and all that kind of stuff through this, but so I think the learning goes both ways.
Okay.
So it's, they will learn from me and they will learn from CM Punk.
Yeah.
But I will also learn from them, because you have to keep in mind that as somebody who's 40 years old and has been in wrestling for 21 years, that I have certain ways of thinking about things. And the wrestling business and the entire world is not the same as it was
stands still.
In 1999, right? And so, like, hey, Dante Martin, who's 20 years old,
right?
What do you love about wrestling? What does your generation love about wrestling? Because it's different. They have a different approach to it than I did, right? Like when I fell in love with the Ultimate Warrior,
right.
It was completely different, you know? And so I'm also interested from that perspective, as far as growing as a human and growing as a performer, of learning from the younger guys as well.
So tomorrow night, Arthur Ashe Stadium, it's a non-title match. It's your first match. Is that how, as we craft these stories and craft everything going forward, is that how it should be? A guy, even a big star like yourself, should be non-title first. Is that the belief here?
Well, so one of the things that I think AEW has also done a great job of is creating consistent stories. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things is creating an environment that feels believable, you know? So it's like, okay, in AEW, to get a title match, you have to...
You got to beat somebody.
You have to work your way up the rankings. Nobody, no matter how big or how small, comes in and gets a title match right off the bat. And I also think, so I think that is consistent within the AEW storytelling universe, and that's what makes it so appealing. And then it also, like, opens it up to people not knowing what's going to happen within that match, and then what are the ramifications of the match. The match themselves have ramifications. Right. If I win, do I get a title match? Like, all of those kinds of things. You get to see all the different layers of story telling, but then there's also, it creates an environment where fans can go back to and they can rely on. They know that this is consistent.
So back to you and Punk real quick. You debut within 2 weeks of each other. Is there a natural competition with you guys now because you're both coming in from the outside and both now in AEW? Are you almost a unifying force? Is it a competitive force? How does that dynamic work?
So I honestly, I don't feel competitive with anybody but myself.
Okay.
But one of the things that I did do is my approach has changed based on what CM Punk has done. So, for example, in my mind, I was thinking when you saw, and so many people watched it, Punk's debut on Rampage, it was crazy. Right. It was crazy. And it was such an incredible moment. But when I watched the interview, I was like, whoa, those are similar feelings to what I have.
Yeah.
We can't be the same character, as far as we can't be the same person who like, hey, I just want to come in here and help out the young guys, right? That sort of thing. Yeah. And so I had to change my vision of what I am. I'm not here to help out the young guys. I'm not here to be a mentor or anything like this. I'm here to kick people's freaking heads in. Right. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And and to prove
you're here to compete.
Yeah. And he's here to see if he can still be the best in the world. No, I'm the opposite. I know I'm the best.
Okay.
I'm here to see if they're as good as I am. Okay. Like, is it Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and all those guys, they call themselves the Elite. Are they elite, or should AEW really stand for all entitled wrestling? Like, there's all those sorts of things, and that
got me fired up a little bit. Yeah, right,
and that
got me fired up. I kind of want to fight somebody.
Yeah, yeah, and that's
not anybody in this room, but
and I think that was actually very helpful for me because I saw Punk's thing and it was great.
Yeah,
and then but in my mind I was like, I can't be that.
So it kind of gave you a roadmap.
It gave me a roadmap, and so I don't think. So I'm a big believer, when you talk about from an evolutionary standpoint, there's the idea of survival of the fittest and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that they actually believe rather than survival of the fittest is actually survival of what works best within the system. It doesn't matter if you're a tiger if you run out of prey. You know what I mean?
All right.
Like you run out. So I think what survives is what works well within an ecosystem. So I can't be the same thing as Punk. I have to be different from Punk, and Kenny Omega has to be different from me, and the Young Bucks have to be different from him, and Jon Moxley has to be different from them, and Dante Martin for sure is different than all of us because he can do shit I've never seen before. And so it's like,
I'm a 42-year-old man who grew up in West Point, Mississippi, so that tiger metaphor there, that animal kingdom, was a little bit too educated for me. You lost me.
Sorry.
I'm quite stupid. Yeah. But it had the cadence of something that made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
No, I hear you where you're coming from. Have you gotten used to your music yet?
So the weird part about the music is that so I love the music. My friend Elliot made the song actually. But the hard part is people do the yes chant when I come out, but it's not to the beat of my music.
Correct.
So then I have the problem of, am I moving with the yes chants or am I moving with the beat? And if I try to do both, I end up looking like a 40-year-old man who's not cool.
Understood. I got you, brother. Yeah. You've never watched the show, listened to the show, and that's fine. Nobody else has either. But so wrestling is just it's not an inside podcast. It's not. I'm not looking at it from a wrestler's point of view or from a wrestling news reporter's point of view. This is a show for fans by fans. I'm lucky enough to work at a place where I get access to stars like yourself. So it's for fans by fans. But when I have wrestlers in here, I do have a wrestling nerd that gives me. This is the wrestling nerd question portion of the show.
Oh, perfect.
His name is Kyle. He's a Florida wrestling fan. A huge fan of yours. He asks all the nerd questions here. By the way, the night you did the takeover of Raw and everybody was out there, Kyle was in your group.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it framed on his wall? Anyway, so here are the questions.
Oh, boy.
These are wrestling nerd questions.
Yep.
Some of them I don't understand. There's 3 of them. Can you explain the psychology between no longer doing the yes chants with your arms, but asking leading questions during your promos to get people to say yes?
Yeah. So that's.
Oh, was he right? Is that actually a thing?
So you do. So I have done it because it's an easy way to get a response and to get fans to give fans the ability to show how excited they are about the potential matchup of me versus Kenny Omega.
And to get the fans to participate, I guess.
Yes. But I'm not doing it myself because I respect WWE's intellectual property.
Okay.
And so and I don't think anything legally. They haven't threatened anything legally.
Yeah.
But it's just so I had a great conversation with Kevin Dunn with WWE before I debuted with AEW, and I was very upfront with WWE about, okay, I just want to let you guys know I'm leaving. This is kind of my debut date and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so, but it was, they asked me politely to respect their intellectual property, even some of the things that couldn't be legally enforced.
Yeah.
And I'm trying my best to do that. There's also certain expectations fans have of me,
right,
that they want to be able to do, and I'm happy that they still get to do that. I'm going to do my best to avoid swinging my arms in the air.
There's also a certain element of knowing what that wrestling fans are what drive this whole thing, right? And it's very fun for people to do like this, like that's it's just never going to go away, even if you went away.
Yeah,
right.
It's never going to go away.
Right.
Also, WWE, their fans still do it for other people.
So I went to SmackDown at MSG a couple weeks ago. It was fantastic. 15 minutes before the show, the entire place is doing this. It's just why it's 19,000 people in there already, and they're going crazy. Now it didn't happen during the show, but it was still it was, and I had my 12-year-old daughter right there who's just getting into wrestling and loves everything about wrestling, and she's doing this. I say, do you know who that's for? No,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
She's just getting into it.
And it's fun because so I was a part of the San Francisco Giants World Series parade.
Yes, sir.
Right at the end of 2014, and Hunter Pence, he was leading the Yes Chants, and he told me, he said, "Yeah, I mean, I saw it from a college basketball game where
Michigan State. I remember that
Michigan State. So one of their football players, led the whole arena in doing it, right? And then so he saw it and like, oh, that's empowering. I'll do it. He had no reference to me doing the Yes Chant. It's just fun to do. It's motivating. There's like a synchronicity kind of to a whole arena of people doing the exact same thing in the same movement in the same time. You feel a part of something.
I mean, chants are fun.
Chants are fun.
And chants with body movements are double the fun.
Double the fun.
And how often there haven't been many chants with body movements.
Yeah.
That's why we still do the wave 40 years later. The wave is stupid, but we still do it.
Do you know why? And it's a very similar reason why we do the Yes Chant is because you can't move horizontally in an arena or else you hit people.
You have to go up.
You can only go vertically. So that's why the wave still exists. That's why the Yes Chant still exists.
Oh, wow. I never thought there would be actual reasons behind the psychology.
I've never heard anybody say it, but that's like I've had to think about like I don't have to. Like sometimes I just you're on these long car drives, like 4 hours between shows. I'm like, why is this so fun for people to do? And why don't so for example, when I started doing No, I was a bad guy. No didn't catch on. Oh, it's horizontal.
Yeah, people get
it's
concussions.
Not vertical.
Right.
Yeah. Although some people still do it. What they do is they lean forward really heavy, and then like.
Well, that's like an umpire saying safe at that point.
Yeah.
All right, nerd question number 2.
Got it.
Do you want the "you're gonna get your"? And Tony got mad at me for cussing last time. Sorry, it's just the chant. Do you want the "you're gonna get your fucking head kicked in" chant come back?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It was actually it's part of my theme music now. Like there's they eliminated the F word.
Okay.
But one of the things that I thought was coolest by the end of my independent run was that I'd be across the ring from somebody, and before the match even starts, there's a chant: "You're gonna get your fucking head kicked in."
Yeah. Right.
And it's just like it sets such an incredible atmosphere.
You got pretty good rhythm for a white guy from Washington.
Well, yeah. I don't do too bad. I can shake my booty a little bit, No,
so. It's. I remember the first time I watched a Bryan Danielson match, and I think it was in Ring of Honor. I'm almost certain it was back 2008, 2009, somewhere around in there. And I had never watched you, and then my first impression of that match was the chant. I'm like, well, if he's got this chant, this guy must be serious business.
Well, and you have to imagine how hard it was to get that chant over when we weren't even on TV.
Right. Yeah.
So it was like that's a difficult chant to get.
Yeah.
Imagine an entire building full of anybody, but let alone like wrestling fans getting that.
It's a long
cadence.
chant with a lot of rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So He gave the last nerd question, and then
Okay.
I'm going to wrap you up in a second. And got about 6 minutes left with you. He asked 4 wrestlers. He said, which of these 4 technical wrestlers would you like to wrestle the most? I know some of them. I don't know all of them.
Okay.
The first one is Zack Sabre Jr.
Okay.
The second one is Daniel Garcia.
Okay.
So obviously, Josh Alexander.
Okay.
And then, I don't know how to say his name, but it's Fred Yehi.
Oh,
Yee.
okay.
Yee. I don't know how to say his name.
So, I will.
These names all make sense to you, though.
Yes, they all make sense to me. I know who each one of them are.
Yeah.
I would like to wrestle all of them. I think the one that's most likely to happen the soonest is the Daniel Garcia match because he's in AEW. I also think that's one of those matches where he could learn a lot from me and I could learn a lot from him because he's so young. So like that's a match that I'm really looking forward to. Although, one of the things that I want outside of AEW, I want to do this in England because he's English. Is I want to wrestle Zack Sabre Jr. in England.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's a very narrowly focused goal that you have. I mean, you've really mapped this out.
Well, because there's the I don't know if it's the longest running, but it's probably the most well-known like wrestling journal is the Wrestling Observer newsletter by Dave Meltzer, right? And after I was forced to retire, he renamed the best technical wrestler the Bryan Danielson Award because I had won it so many years in a row. Well, now
because you kept leaving a voicemail saying, "Dave, please name it."
and then now Zack Sabre Jr.'s won it like 7 years in a row. So some of those years I was in forced retirement, but even since I've come back, he's still winning the best technical wrestler
That's named
award.
after you.
Yeah, that's named after me.
You can't even win the Bryan Danielson Award.
I'm number 2 in my own award. So now I want a match with him in England.
Can you imagine Bryan Danielson not being the best Bryan Danielson in the world?
I'm not even the best Bryan Danielson. Somehow as a Zack Sabre Jr., if that's his real name, is winning the Bryan Danielson Award. And so that's something I'd really look forward to.
So that's the nerd questions, and those were fun. I enjoyed those.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like non-nerds can enjoy some of the nerd questions.
Oh,
too.
That's the dirty secret.
Oh.
That's the best part of the nerd questions. They're not really nerdy.
Right, yeah.
So here we are. I'll let you go very, very soon. We're here tomorrow night, New York City. You're opening a building that's never been opened. And AEW is on the precipice of huge things. Just what are your feelings going into this match? I'll ask the second part after you answer that. What are your feelings going into this match and this event?
So I'm excited, and for the first time in a long time, I'm actually a little bit nervous. So it's like
you've been through a lot, man. I mean,
yeah, and you know what? So really, ever since I came back from my retirement, nothing really gets me nervous, right? Like I just approach it with such joy. But one of the reasons why I decided to go with AEW over WWE was this idea that it honestly, there was a little part of me that was nervous / scared.
Is it the unknown?
It's the unknown. It's the idea, can I still do that at the level that I think I can do it? Like I was very comfortable in WWE.
Yeah.
And being comfortable is great most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when you want to push your limits, like you need to do things that scare you, excite you, make you nervous a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's what this
So you're
feels
challenging yourself.
like. Challenging myself, yeah.
All right. So tomorrow night, I'm sure it will be a phenomenal match. It's going to be a great show. 6 months from now, a year from now, you plan that far? You thought about what's next after this, or you just taking it as it goes?
So I don't worry about that.
Okay.
Like we don't even know if, what will happen in 6 months as far as with COVID. I think the last couple of years has taught us a lot of things about not taking things for granted.
Fair enough.
And also my forced retirement has taught me to not take a lot of things for granted. Like I try to enjoy going out there every single moment, and I do try to plan ahead a little bit because that's the way wrestling's the best, right? Yeah. Is like with well thought out things and that sort of thing.
Right.
Put a lot of time and effort into it, but I don't hang my happiness on any of those things or hang my hopes on any of those things.
All right, that is Bryan Danielson, and maybe the match of the year, the show of the year. I can definitely say that. The show of the year for AEW is tomorrow night. It's in Arthur Ashe Stadium, New York City. He's the best in the world. He's one of the best in the world. Kenny Omega's one of the best in the world. We'll find out what that means tomorrow night. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
That's wrestling.